But anyways, so yes, today the creative title is The Splendor of God, and I gave each week a fancy title like that, and so the pattern is something of God, the splendor of God, the temple of God. We'll talk about church architecture and you know the symbolism of that, the patristic understanding of those things. I can't remember. The last one is the image of God, and so it plays on this theme of how everything in our tradition points to something divine, something related to the divine life that God chooses to disclose to us and share with us. And today we'll be talking about our tradition of vestments, and then we'll kind of touch on other related subjects very briefly, like liturgical colors, brocades, fabrics, the history of those things. It's also important, I think, especially in our situation where we're sort of in a foreign land, you know, singing the Lord's Song, to remind ourselves of what the height of the Byzantine tradition can be, because our tradition really is one that dwells in the exuberance and the overflowing, all the stuff of the tradition, you know. Whereas the Latin tradition certainly can be quite Baroque, but at its heart is a very austere tradition. And in a certain sense, people talk about the mysticism of the East, but I would argue that the Roman Rite is actually much more, it presents itself in a way that is more, you can contemplate, have moments of quiet contemplation more in the Roman Rite. But ours is a mysticism of activity, and there's kind of kineticism going on, movement, going from point A to point B and back again to point A, you know. And it's because it's all about the divine activity, the divine energies we talk about in our tradition, that overflow from the Godhead and bring us back to the source, emanation and return to our Creator and our source.
Question.
Yes.
Do you feel like that difference in exuberance and austerity, interior, exterior, do you feel like the fact that if we're having like a Sunday liturgy or divine liturgy, the custom in the East is to stand, right? Whereas there's more genuflection, kneeling, things like that in the Latin Mass traditionally?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Although maybe we'll get a better sense of that question as we go along, especially in the other classes. But I don't know how to answer that at the moment, but maybe I'll form an answer as we go on. So what's the purpose of vestments, one may ask, especially if one doesn't come from a Catholic or Orthodox background. You know, if you're used to just having, you know, pastor wearing a suit or worse, Hawaiian shirt or you know, Converse. Whatever. You know. Indeed. What's the purpose of vestments? And I would say that vestments serve the same purpose as every other aspect of our liturgical tradition. And actually of every Catholic liturgical tradition, whether you're Byzantine or Roman or Syro-Malabar or Chaldean or Syriac, whatever. And that one purpose that we all have in common, that every aspect of our tradition has, is to reveal the kingdom. This is the purpose of every sacramental and ritual act. And behind all the 7 sacraments, so-called, there's really just one sacrament, the sacrament of the kingdom. But how do the sacraments and how does our liturgical tradition reveal the kingdom? In what manner do we encounter it in the church? Interestingly enough, the Protestant scholar James Jordan has some interesting insights, and he explains that the ancient biblical worldview, the one that I would argue is the same worldview we have in the church and the liturgy, is one in which ritual and symbolism are inseparable from perceiving reality itself. That the material world was understood always to be inherently bound up and saturated with the other world, that is enchanted, as scholars have talked about at length these days, popularly. And he says this: the biblical worldview is not given to us in the discursive and analytical language of philosophy and science, but in the rich and compact language of symbolism and art. It is pictured in ritual and architecture, in numerical structures and geographic directions, in symbols and types, in trees and stars. In short, it is given to us in a pre-modern package that seems very, very strange at times. When we look at the stars, we as modern people imagine millions of suns very far away from us. There are Cepheid variables, double stars, neutron galaxies, and quasars. In the Bible, however, stars are given as signs for the seasons and for days and for the years, because the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. while the biblical perspective does not invalidate the investigations of the starry heavens, as in science, could it be that we are not seeing all that we should see when we look at the stars? Do we need new eyes? And of course, the conceit of this class is that we do need new eyes. We must learn how to see again, how to see the things that our tradition is trying to show us. But how do we obtain new eyes? How do we learn to see? That is how to deeply perceive what the liturgy and sacraments contain. And while we explore this question, it's important to explore, and this will elucidate and illuminate this question, that behind the concept of sacrament, the original concept behind that, of course, is the Greek term mysterion, or mystery. And the word mystery comes from a Greek root mio, which indicates something closed, something shut. It's related to our English word mute, a shut mouth. A mystery is a secret, something hidden and unexpected. In other words, it's something that which would not be obvious unless we were guided, unless we were taught to understand. Initiation is required. And this initiation includes, as intrinsic to it, a type of catechesis called mystagogy, which is the explanation and the opening up of the mysteries. You might say mysterion, mystery, is the shut door, and the idea of apocalypsis is the opening of the doors. When the disciples approached Christ in the Gospels, they said, "Why do you speak to them in parables, in mysteries, and secrets?" And our Lord says to them, well, to them, it has not been granted. Well, he says, to you, it has been granted to know the secrets of the kingdom, the mysterion of the kingdom. But to them, to the uninitiated, it has not been granted, so that seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not hear. St. Paul says, our gospel, I wish my Bible would be called a little bit there. He says something about how our gospel is veiled to those who are perishing, right? So in order to understand, initiation is required. Catechesis is precisely this guidance, this instruction, which is meant to lead would-be disciples into this mystery.
Do any Eastern Orthodox communities still dismiss the catechumenate?
Yeah, if you go to the monastery in Candelia, they won't even let you in if you're not Orthodox. Like you cannot go inside the church.
Oh wow!
Like if they don't ask, then obviously you can do whatever you want. But if they end up learning that you're not Orthodox, as far as you can go is the narthex, like the lobby of the church.
Which is very coherent. Like
that's the ancient practice,
that's
right?
quite coherent.
I mean,
being barred from the entirety.
The actual ancient practice is, of course, when we were one, that if you're not a baptized Catholic of the East or of the West, you were not allowed past the vestibule, past the narthex, right? But then, of course, Orthodox now apply that to all non-Orthodox, including other Christians. And even in places where they don't do that, they'll still say the litany. Catechumens depart, departing catechumens. None of the catechumens remain. But then, everybody just stays anyways. So it's kind of
I guess but you're saying that they don't even have a dismissal anymore. They won't even let you in. But it used to be where you're in there and then you leave before the Eucharist, right?
Yeah. So
that's what we did with catechumens in my Roman church growing up. So
that's a curious question. Yeah, do they not? My recollection is that they don't even let them in.
Okay.
But I think that's in reference to this earlier practice where they would have been ushered into the narthex at that point.
Okay.
Right, because everything's in Greek anyway, so like no one's gonna understand what's going on.
Is the dismissal at the start of the anaphora? I don't remember exactly.
It's shortly before the anaphora.
Okay.
Yeah. So related to this, sometimes people ask, like especially like Romans who are wanting to explore Eastern Catholicism, they'll say like, I always see these Reddit posts. What should I expect at my first Byzantine liturgy? Do you have any tips for me? And I always find that very weird because why would you expect to know anything? Right? That's like seeing people play Monopoly and you've never played Monopoly before. You don't know any of the rules and you're confused that you don't know the rules. Well, obviously you're not going to know the rules because you've never played Monopoly, right? So some people ask this. They're worried about not understanding, but of course they wouldn't understand. And why would you expect to understand? Father John Baer, the dean of my former seminary, he says this about the Old Testament and not understanding the Old Testament, and we can apply this to the liturgy too. He says, those who read scripture without the explanation of the treasure that it contains, the gospel it anticipates, see in scripture only myths and fables. It is through the cross that light is shed upon the scriptures, removing the veil that lay over Moses himself and now lies upon those who read Moses without a knowledge of Christ. In the same way, the liturgy is going to be veiled to those who have not been initiated into its secrets. So of course, your experience of, I don't know what's going on, that's the normal one, right? It would be weird if you went and you just understood, so it's a very different approach to worship, like kind of the contemporary Protestant understanding of worship is, it should be, seeker friendly. Nothing should be, so strange that it's incomprehensible. But the ancient understanding of liturgy that's common to the ancient Catholic tradition, that's retained specifically in the Byzantine tradition and various other Eastern traditions, and I would argue in the traditional Latin Mass as well, is that there are many things that you're not going to understand and you're not meant to. This isn't for you to understand, at least not now, in the way, like I was very interested in the way that we seem to be, not in any disparaging way, a little bit more casual in the sense that, like, in my Orthodox formation, I was taught that lay people aren't even allowed to touch the gospel plate, or any of the implements on the altar, Even subdeacons are only allowed to take things off, but we cannot put anything on. So there's these fine distinctions made, right?
Only we had enough people to,
Right.
to do
I was
that.
gonna say, we might do that someday too.
That sounds extremely appropriate.
What you're talking about with understanding, my dad struggled with that when he was converting, because he felt like he was worried about like not knowing what he was supposed to do or what was going on in the liturgy. And I took what I thought was an appropriately Eastern tack on it. I told him, don't worry about it, just do what the people around you do. Don't go up for Eucharist until you've been received into the church, right? And he knew that, I didn't have to tell him that. And go to catechesis when they offer it and don't worry about it. And that's what he did, and he's been fine. And he gets it now.
I mean, it's also like going to China, like, and stepping off the plane and being like, what's going on?
Chill a minute, observe.
Of course you're not gonna understand,
Well, but I've been with Protestant friends to like their Roman Catholic Mass for the first time, and like everyone kneels all of a sudden and you're the last person left standing is like really overwhelming. And so I think there's a lot of like, what movements do I need to be prepared for? Where the Orthodox is like, would you stand there? So Eastern Catholics, you just stand there, it's fine,
But people get confused about when people bow and stuff like that.
Right.
But but of course that's confusing, just like not knowing how to play Monopoly or going to China,
My dad was raised Baptist, so that's part of like
So
why
sacrament,
not understanding was hard for him.
of course, we're not used to that as modern people,
That was really
Sacrament as mysterion, as mystery, denotes something hidden, as we said, something beyond the scope of our gaze or material vision. Something is hidden in order to reveal something in a more subtle and profound manner. We taste bread, but we see God, right? That's what we say in the liturgy. Right after we take communion, the first hymn that we sing is, "We have seen the true light." So we eat bread and we see light. What's the connection there? Bread, by its natural accidents, as the Thomists call it, conceals its true nature in the liturgy, the nature in which we encounter the living God hidden in it. Vestments too at once serve to hide something, the specific person of the priest or deacon or server. And in this hiding, it reveals something else, something deeper, greater, more subtle. Just like Monopoly, you need to know how to orient your vision. You need to learn the rules. A random person wouldn't know. Only the initiated have been granted to know. In order to see, and this is something I've coined over the years, in order to see, you need the key. And for Christians, as Father John Barrett said, the key that unlocks the mystery, just like it unlocks the mystery of the Old Testament, is the event of Jesus Christ. Christianity is an initiation into a mystery. That's what Christianity originally was and is, arguably. A mystery which must reorient our gaze, and in this reorientation, it flips our world upside down. And of course, we have to do some wordplay there, because orient literally means to face the east, right? For it is in this encounter that, it flips our world upside down, because it is the encounter with the mystery of Christ. And the encounter with Christ is always an encounter with the crucified Christ, because that's where we see Christ disclosed to the world, right? Because in the Synoptic Gospels, up until that moment, Jesus is always hushing people. He's telling the demon-possessed people, don't tell them. You cannot tell them now. And the disciples don't understand, are you going to restore Israel now? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? It's like, you haven't understand anything that I've been talking about. But in the cross, we see what God was going to do. And it's not anything that anyone expected. The Jews at that time, they were not expecting a crucified and dying Messiah. They were expecting a military conqueror, a mighty king that comes with the sword to free Israel from its pagan captors and enemies. And yet, the way God chooses to disclose himself is not in this way that the humans expected, but in a way that's totally unexpected, unanticipated. It flips our world upside down. Catechesis is the process whereby the church shapes and forms our gaze, the gaze of believers, that we might be able to see in the cross the King of glory, right? That's why in Eastern icons, it doesn't say Inri, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's the historical thing that it says. But the icon has already been transfigured. The icon shows us the other side of the initiation. It's not Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. It's Jesus Christ, the King of glory. And we're supposed to see, not in spite of the cross, but in light of the cross, that Jesus is the King of glory. There was originally no icon of the resurrection. The icon of the resurrection was just the crucifix. The crucifix was the icon of the crucifixion and the resurrection. That's why the ancient crucifixes of both East and West, think of the San Damiano crucifix, right? Mm-hmm. It shows him upright as if he's holding up the cross, because that's the risen Christ. But we can only see him in the cross. That's why St. Paul says, I only preach Christ crucified. Some people make the mistake and say, oh, the West is all about the passion, but the East is all about the glory and the resurrection. That's not true. The East is also about the passion, because it's inseparable. There's no resurrection outside of the cross. If you can't see the resurrection in the cross, you're not going to see it outside of the cross. And in fact, when people tried to see it outside of the cross, they didn't even recognize him. When Jesus is walking with the disciples, they don't even recognize him. And they've been following him, presumably, for the last 3 years.
Interesting.
But what happens? He has to break the bread and open the books. He has to remove the veil over their eyes. And then they say, ah, my Lord. And then he disappears from their midst. To show us that it's not the risen Christ himself as such that discloses himself, but he's only disclosed in the cross. He just disappears because we're supposed to look back to the cross, and we're supposed to break bread and open the books, and then see in the cross the risen one. The liturgy too is this veiled thing until we have the key. Like I said, we eat bread and then we see light. This is why baptism is called illumination, because the world becomes lit up in new ways. Meaning emerges where there was none before, where there was only ambiguity. We eat bread, we see light. We experience life in the midst of death, victory in the midst of suffering, and the paradox of the Christian revelation, that is the cross. The power of God made perfect in human weakness, in the language of the New Testament. So in the liturgy, we see men in funny costumes and behold angels. We may not even see what's going on in the altar because the iconostas. And yet, there's a great mystery going on there, not because we can see it with our eyes, as if we could tell that the bread is God, but because we have new eyes. Therefore, the iconostas only serves to conceal what is material and earthly, while it forces our gaze to pierce the veil and to see heaven. The good news for us who find ourselves, so to speak, exiled from the temple, from our homeland, from the promised land, from the fullness of the weekly cycle of services, worshiping without a priest and in a warehouse space. The good news for us here is that once you learn how to see, it doesn't matter if you are experiencing the liturgy in a grand cathedral, in a small monastic cell, or in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the desert, in a warehouse, in a prison camp, wherever. If you have the key, then you'll see the entire world can be lit up with the splendor of God. But if you don't have the key of Christ's cross, then even the grandest Byzantine cathedral can seem empty, and the most beautiful iconostas can be nothing but an obstruction to our vision. if we have gained this new vision through this illumination and initiation, then even Golgotha can appear to us as paradise. And even the worst situation can be an opportunity and a catalyst to experience God's presence and his glory and his splendor. I'll say it again, if you want to see, you need the key. And this key, this catalyzing event of the cross, the encounter with Jesus in the cross, discloses this new vision, which includes both the revelation of a great problem, but also of a greater solution. The revelation is a revelation of a problem, and it's the revelation of a solution to this problem. Think about St. Paul. St. Paul, when he was Saul, before he knew Christ, he read the Old Testament, he read the Bible, and he said, I am righteous according to the law. But then after his encounter with Christ, that flips his world upside down. Literally, he falls off his steed, and he becomes blind. And then after this encounter, he reads those same scriptures of the Old Testament, and he says, I am the chief of sinners. So his entire perception, his entire interpretive framework of the same thing, the source doesn't change, just his interpretive framework. He gains new eyes. And so the encounter with Christ for us reveals, number one, the problem, the fallenness of man, but also the new life available through initiation into the mystery of Christ. And therefore, as we are initiated into Christ through baptism, we acknowledge our sin. That's what baptism is. We come to the waters to be washed of our sin. And immediately as we rise from the waters, we are given new life. The initiatic experience presents the illumined, the newly baptized, with the problem and the solution at once. And this revelation of our fallenness is precisely described in the language of Scripture and the liturgy in terms of nakedness and being stripped of our clothing. Paradoxically, while Adam was naked in the garden, liturgical poetry describes him as clothed with immaterial glory. But after he falls, he puts on clothes, but then he's described as spiritually naked. Hear the hymns of the church. Having rivaled the first-formed Adam by my transgression, I have found myself stripped naked of God, of the everlasting kingdom, and all of its delights because of my sins. I have torn the garment that the Creator first wove for me in the beginning, and therefore I lie naked. I have clothed myself in the torn robe that the serpent hath spitefully stitched for me by his counsel, and now I am ashamed. These come from the canon of repentance during Lent. The New Testament in our prayer tradition also describes our fallen condition as not possessing the proper wedding garment that grants us access to the feast. In one of the prayers before Holy Communion, we say, into the splendor of thy saints, how shall I, the unworthy one, enter? For if I should dare to enter thy bridal chamber, my vesture doth betray me, for it is not a wedding garment. And as one bound, I shall be cast out by the angels. Cleanse, O Lord, the defilement of my soul, and save me. And as we talked about vestments from here on, we always should have in the back of our minds our Lord's specific words of criticism about vestments. Beware the scribes who enjoy walking around in long robes and love greetings in the marketplace and the best seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at the feasts, who like to be called teacher and master. And this is all stuff that we do in our tradition, actually.
Right.
People walk around in long robes. We give the hierarchs the place of honor, and we call them master, right? So there's a subtle paradox there, a subtle kind of thing. There's a subtle. It's almost as if there's this weird tick in the tradition where if you don't do, it's like you have to do it, because if you don't do it, you might think that you're good. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Protestants always say, why do you Catholics have all these rituals and all this fancy stuff? The Bible says not to do that. Well, they're actually right. The Bible does say not to do that. But it's almost like there's this weird, nervous tick that the tradition contains in itself, where it's like, no, we're not supposed to do it, but you have to do it, because if you don't do it, you might think that you're good. You might think, like the Puritans, we don't do those things, therefore we're good. We're plain, but that plainness becomes a new kind of Pharisaical long robes and greetings in the street, right? And so the nervous tick is, no, you have to do all stuff that seems wrong, but then we have to transform it. It's like the Antichrist is described as seated on the throne in the place of Christ. And then we put our bishops in a throne that has Christ on it in the place of Christ, and we seat him and we put a crown on him. And it's like, no, we have to do this, because if we don't do this, we might think that we're not doing it.
It's
But
like
we
a
are
vaccine.
doing it.
It's like a minor dose of the evil to keep us healthy. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
sure.
Yeah.
But it's also, you have to do it to transform it, to elevate our gaze, to flip it upside down.
The vestments aren't just there to remind us that, the priest is not the priest. He's acting in the person of Christ. It's to remind the priest himself.
That, and I'll get to that. But also there's a subtle thing there where the tradition is telling us, yes, but look more closely.
It's sort of like looking at your doom so that you're afraid of it enough that you stay in line.
Yes. Yeah, it's all of those and more, and things that I'm not even saying. It's like, yes, we are doing something kind of weird, but look more closely and you'll see that all the gold, all the glitz is just plated. It's all just cheap pressed brass made in India. This crown is paper mache. If you scratch it a little bit, this little bead is gonna fall off. This little sequin bead that's glued on with hot glue is gonna fall off. You know what I mean? Okay, well maybe you don't and maybe you do, but we'll keep going. We hide behind facades according to these things, right? All the clothing that we've put on after the fall, right? It's not the clothing that the Lord put on us in our creation, the clothing of his divine glory. And so paradoxically, this clothing increases our nakedness, our shame. It is this shame that we confess in repentance and baptism. Remember that in baptism, originally, all the catechumens had to be baptized naked. That's why there were deaconesses in the early church, right? Because it would be inappropriate for a male clergyman to baptize a naked woman. Because you literally had to strip away the post-lapsarian ways, your being, your garments of skin, be naked, go back into the water, and then what happens? You're clothed with a white robe, which is symbolically, as we'll talk about in a second here, symbolic of the new life in Christ. So the revelation gives us this great problem, this revelation of our sinfulness, of our fallenness, and yet the revelation of Christ also gives us the solution, that Christ himself, the solution is that Christ himself has given us a new robe. He has given us the wedding garment to attend the feast. Like the prodigal son, he has placed the best robe on us. And so we emerge from baptism as we rise from our knees, from our penitential prayers or the waters of the baptismal font, clothed with a new robe, which is Christ himself. We put on Christ. The book of Sirach describes the glorious appearance of the high priest in the temple in his awe-inspiring vestments. In chapter 5, Aaron is remembered as blessed with splendid vestments. He was vested with a glorious robe and consummate glory. The rest of the chapter goes on to describe his golden crown of authority bearing the divine name and the other marvelous garments that signify his priestly glory. In Sirach 50, the high priest Simon is described as glorious like the morning star among the clouds, like the full moon on feast days, like the sun shining upon the temple of the Most High, and like the rainbow gleaming in glorious clouds. He is further compared to an array of beautiful flowers and plants and other splendid things. To the ancient Jewish mind, the splendor of the priestly garments was meant to represent the original divine glory of Adam before the fall. In the Christian revelation, it is Christ himself as the eternal high priest and perfect image of God who restores the glory of humanity in the new creation of the church. In the book of Revelation, the martyrs are given splendid white robes, symbolic of their purity and innocence. Our Blessed Lady is described as clothed with the sun in utter and all-consuming brilliance. And the kingdom of God itself, the New Jerusalem, is described as coming down from heaven, dressed and adorned as a bride for her husband. It is this symbolism we invoke, and hopefully not the one of the Pharisees, when we utilize the beauty and splendor of vestments. And it is this imagery we have to keep in mind as we continue to beautify and think of ways to beautify our own liturgical celebration in the situation we find ourselves here.
And that's Aaron?
That's a Russian icon of Aaron, yeah. it's interesting. This is actually more of a modern one, in the sense of like from the 19th century. If you look at the older Byzantine icons of Aaron, they don't actually, and of like different high priests and stuff and priests, even though the Bible has like descriptions of stuff, the old icons don't. They choose not to depict them accurately to the scripture. They're sort of vested in a way that's a cross between the Old Testament and New Testament. They're kind of dressed like Orthodox priests, but kind of mixed. Like they'll have like some kind of phalonian on often, because of course, as we'll go on, you know, the literal is not the important thing. It's the symbolic, spiritual meaning, right? And so as we talked about this new garment of that's symbolic of the new life in Christ, the garment of baptism, the white robe of the martyrs, the white robe of baptism, the first vestment, so to speak, that we encounter in the church is the sticarium. Oh, I realize my slides are all messed up. Okay, so for dramatic effect, it is this symbolism we invoke when we talk about vestments. Okay. And so the first vestment we encounter in the church is the sticarium. This is the fundamental and foundational vestment of all the major and minor orders, and is evocative of the robe of baptism itself. And therefore, symbolically, it is the vestment of the new life in Christ. It is the vestment common to all Christians in a certain sense. If any male person theoretically, is serving in the altar, this is what he puts on, because by default, it is his right, because it is the robe of baptism. It is the robe of the new life in Christ. So any baptized Christian has, quote unquote, a right, or rather he has inherited, but maybe that's a better word, the robe of baptism, new life in Christ, that is symbolic within the sticarion, and therefore it is immediately.
Why isn't it white?
Well, I mean, it can be white, as we've seen some white versions.
I would think if it was like.
So the priest one is white, and we'll talk about more white.
Okay.
What does white even mean? We'll talk about that too.
This is my kind of class.
What does white even mean?
Yeah. So this is a beautiful modern example, obviously, like one of the most gorgeous ones, and we'll look at more examples. But it is worn by readers, servers, subdeacons, deacons, major orders, minor orders, and by priests and bishops too, in a different form slightly, as a base garment under all their vestments. And we'll discuss that in more detail in a second. And the vesting prayer that we say is, "My soul shall rejoice in the Lord, for he hath clothed me in the garment of salvation." So there's the symbolism of being the garment of the new life in Christ. "And with the vesture of gladness hath he covered me. He hath placed a crown upon me as a bridegroom, and he hath adorned me as a bride with comeliness." So this prayer associates the sticarium with the new life in Christ, as we already said. It is the symbolic robe of the wedding feast that believers are gifted. And the mention of a crown evokes both the Byzantine wedding rite, but also the eschatological symbolism of the garments of the saints, the crown of the martyrs of the saints. And the eschatological symbolism of the wedding garment is further highlighted by the use in some traditions as male wedding attire for tonsure minor clerics. So like if a reader or a subdeacon gets married in some traditions, they wear a sticarium.
That's so cool.
Yeah. This is preserved in the Russian Old Rite today. Although theoretically, I'm sure if you ask your priest, and if you're a reader or something, they'll let you do this. Maybe not, I don't know, maybe people think it's weird, but theoretically it is a tradition.
This is fascinating. This is like my Catholic instincts from creative Catholicism are like, this is wrong.
What, the crowns?
No, the wearing vestments while kissing a bride.
Right. You're very
I'm
Latin
very-
Catholic.
you're very
like,
Latin.
Clerics don't kiss girls.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's crazy. Our priests have babies.
No, I know, but like, this is clearly a very romantic moment.
I know, look how sweet.
And so to have like a priest with this very romantic moment, or not a priest, but someone in vestments is very cognitively dissonant to again the traditions that I was.
Yeah, we're in an ordinarian building. They have priests that have babies too.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah. So it's evocative of this eschatological moment, right? Every wedding rite points to the eschatological wedding of the Lamb and the church, right? And you see it especially in this image. What is there to say about it? You see it. It's interesting. The crowns. You think of yeah. Anyways.
I love this white linen or something that the couple is standing on as their designated. You know, because usually you'll have like wedding chairs or something, and so obviously you don't sit in these. Then that's.
Is that what that's all about? The
white sheet that they're standing on the right hand side.
What's the question?
What is that for?
For them to stand on, I guess. I don't.
Incredible, because this is my experience of all things Byzantine. Either it has layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning, or that's just where they stand.
Like, how do they know where to stand?
How else
the cloth will be
stand
there.
on the white cloth?
Yeah, I'm sure it means that they're like together, standing together there.
Sure.
In this moment, yeah. Yeah. So.
Oh, those are gorgeous.
Let's look at some examples.
Incredible.
These are like the best of the best, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is not stuff that your typical deacon will wear. This is like the cream of the crop kind of thing, and they probably cost like thousands.
We have a card now.
This reminds me. I don't think
thousands.
it's quite
Yeah.
quality, but this reminds me of some vestments Father Elias has that he got from Japan, and they have dragons on them.
You got it
Oh,
from Japan?
cool.
You got the fabric from Japan, or you got them made from Japan?
I think he got them made.
I thought he got them from Vietnam.
Maybe Vietnam.
He said
But
Vietnam.
who knows how to make vestments in Vietnam?
There's one
Byzantine vestments.
He told me, I think it's Vietnam. There is one Byzantine Catholic family in all of Vietnam, and he knows that.
Oh yeah, he's responsible for that.
He visits them all the time.
Right.
Flew there, did their wedding and everything.
Right.
And he found that fabric in a shop. I don't know if they were made into vestments.
Okay,
there.
that makes.
Okay.
I
He
can
found
believe
that in
yeah.
the fabric section of whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, of
So-
course, there's a long tradition of
I-
dragons on our
Yeah.
clothes. But
Yeah.
I looked up the white cloth. It's a Russian tradition. It's a way of saying they're standing like in heaven together.
That's what I
There we
figured
go.
it
Yeah,
would
there we
be.
go.
It'd be
Yep.
white.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
These are beautiful.
They
Yeah.
are really
I mean, like I
nice.
said, these I would guess that they cost around $10,000,
Wow.
especially the purple one. I would
That's
guess
what my car cost.
maybe
I mean, that embroidery
5,000.
is pretty intense.
5 to 10. Yeah. So this one, the gold one is actually probably more affordable. That's probably going to be about 1,000. But these other ones, yeah, they're probably around 3 to 5, maybe even more than that, like 8,000, something like that. Yeah. So it's a good time also to briefly mention
The vestment's beautiful.
colors and also different variations of style. Like so, yeah, as we've talked about a little bit, the Typicon describes just two things: bright and dark. And the word for bright is actually the word white. The word white is bright. It's referring to brilliance, right? If we're going to read something later that talks about how the vestments are described as fiery, right? But this is talking about the brilliance of it, regardless if it's red or blue. Like these are fiery vestments in their sheer brilliance and beauty. You know.
So gold is white.
It's bright. It's brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, like, to say that the saints are robed in white, what it's not saying is that the saints are clothed in basic clothing, right? So, like, undyed cloth would have been penitential, right? It would have been kind of an off-white, or like between white and gray and brown, like a tannish, right? And of course, in our culture today, white, like plain white, is more akin to that, right? But when we hear about the saints being robed in white, we should think in brilliance and the best jewels, you know. And so, you know, there's this idea that we wear white on Pascha, which is fine. I appreciate the use of white in all the colors. But really, it's bright. And so in Moscow, they wear red on Pascha, right? On Mount Athos, they wear like polychromatic vestments, like floral, like bursts of flowers, and we'll see some examples of that in a second here. And so it's not, and to say that they should be vested in white, to go from that to white, and you look at the white almost seems too plain.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, and in some traditions, every time the deacon like all the different clergy will be vested in a different color. So if there's two priests, one will be in green, one will be in red, the deacon will be in purple, the other deacon will be in gold. And so it's like this brilliant rainbow of colors, because it's the explosion of Pascha that contains it's that pure white light that contains all the colors on the spectrum, right? That's refracted in the crystal, you know. So that's what white is, we should say. And so there's conventional things, even on the BCC, one of the eparchy website, it has basically what I'm familiar with, which is like, you know, gold is the standard for most Sundays, like, let's say ordinary time. And then Lent is purple. And then some people say, well, but you should wear gold on Sundays. But I really haven't experienced that. And because some people don't go to weekday services, I think it's important for them to see all the differences. And so I think we should wear purple on Sundays too. And actually in Moscow, they make the difference. Black is for weekdays in Lent, and then purple is for weekends in Lent, because
So
it's more festive. It's more bright,
because
right?
purple's more bright than black.
Right. And so they don't think of purple as being, like, it is dark, but it's not.
Compared to black.
Yeah,
it's
compared-
brighter. Yeah.
But actually, funnily enough, in seminary, I learned that some manuscripts say that black was worn on Christmas in the Hagia Sophia. Because if you think about it, black was the hardest color to make, right? Because they didn't have synthetic dyes, rather they used just natural things that they found, and also their perception of color would have been formed by the natural environment too. Right? In Korean and a lot of languages, blue and green are the same word. And that's weird to us because we're used to like RGB colors and synthetic tones.
The gru is a thing in Russian traditionally too. Yeah.
But the ends, if you just look in nature, it's not so clear, right? Is a violet blue or is it purple? Is it red? Right? So there's this color Tyrian purple that was made from the blood of mollusks, right? And it's called purple, but it was really more of a burgundy, and so you read Homer and he talks about the wine red sea, right? So it's completely different. Like, so, throw whatever, it was a completely different world, And also we kind of think of the Middle Ages as being this drab thing from Monty Python, right? But if we went back in time, we would have been so shocked by the brilliance of everything, especially this notion that, the church was like, why was it so rich or whatever? No, it provides public beauty. Like, anyone can go into a cathedral, right? And see like the most brilliant things that people will ever see in their lives, right? If you're like a peasant, And so it's not that the church, of course the church, in some ways the church was rich, but it was like for everyone, So what's my point here? So purple during Lent, and then like green during the Pentecost. So I was used to green during the whole Pentecost season. So from Pentecost to the Feast of Peter and Paul.
Oh, really?
From Peter and Paul to Dormition, red, because like red is for Advent, but it's also for Feast of Martyrs and Apostles. Similar to how they do it, in the Western tradition too. And then we would switch to blue for, the first half of August for Dormition, and then we go to gold again briefly, and then to red November 15th for Advent, and then back to. I think in Greece they'll wear blue also on like Theophany because of the water. Anyways, so I'm sure you've seen some variation of this. It's not so different from what they do in the West. I guess the main difference would be green for Pentecost, but then Pentecost is also associated with ordinary time in the West, and so it's not so different. But all these, of course, were later configurations of color.
The West used to use green for Pentecost. They changed to red later. Yeah.
So there seems to be a common thing, and actually the use of blue for the Theotokos does seem to be ancient.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. There's some indication that it may have been used even as far back into Byzantine times.
Is it because of the reference to like the moon and the stars and stuff, maybe?
Blue was, I don't know exactly what the deal, well.
Was it blue underneath the red and all the icons of the Theotokos?
So
eventually, yeah.
It actually varies a lot more than what people say today. Like, you'll often hear things like, in Jesus it's blue over whatever.
Red for divinity, blue for humanity.
But if you look, it's not actually like that. Like, there's so much variation in ancient iconography. We think like, but whatever symbolism you want to impart to it, I don't have a problem with it. So like even in like the Spanish liturgical traditions, blue is associated with Theotokos. Marian blue.
They get to have blue vestments.
Spanish? And I think the Lutherans added that after the Reformation, so they kind of converged on something.
To your point about public beauty, if you've never been, check out St. Joseph's in San Antonio. It was built by the, I think, German immigrants that, they basically built the parish with their hands. And the gold and filigree and stuff, it was just people like melting down like family heirlooms and stuff.
Yeah, that's how community churches were made back in the day.
It's gorgeous. If you're ever like in downtown San Antonio, make sure you stop and visit. And by the way, the pews, best Latin pews ever. They have a little shelf where you can put all your like missals and stuff, and it's like it's so nice. You could tell the parishioners built it.
I'm gonna keep going as much as I can. Like we're way behind. Like it's already almost 7:30, so we've been here for an hour, and we've done about an eighth of what I have here. So just real brief. I'm gonna say like if you look, there's some slight differences in how the oraria are configured, right? And so the double oraria, like the one that loops around, you know, like the red one. So that is basically what we have in the Greek tradition, which is followed by the Melkites and Antiochians and Greek Orthodox. Whereas in the Russian tradition, it's just the single orarian, the gold, which you see in the gold. And the blue one is also a single orarian. They just have the orarian pinched on the side.
What is double about the double?
It's twice as long. That's why it's
looped
over
okay.
one
So
side.
it's still one piece. They just wrap it differently because it's twice.
Funny you say that. Actually, so to complicate matters, so the ancient form of the stole of the orarian was probably just a single shoulder one. So if you think about Western deacons, they kind of wear it like the blue one, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's like a single stole, like a single length stole, and that's probably the original form of it.
It comes from the Roman Senate.
So we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. But basically, when ranks of clergy began developing, there was like, oh, there's like really important deacons. How do we distinguish those guys? These archdeacons. Give them a longer orarium. And so they started wearing a longer orarium. And then the Russian tradition, this became like concretized as such. And they even have like special made ones where it is actually two pieces and they meet at an angle so that there's no loop. It sits flat on the side, on the side of his abdomen, or whatever, what is this? Your flank?
Your flank.
Yeah.
Flank? Nice.
So it sits flat because it's sewn at an angle, and so you can't actually, if you unwrap it, it's like a V.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the Greek version is just a really long one, and so it loops around.
Well, then how do you untie it to change it for communion? Or they?
So in the Russian tradition, archdeacons do not untie it. They pinch it on the side. They tie the ends on the side in a loose knot.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Now, so what happened was everybody wants the fancy stuff, right? And so the non-archdeacons started to wear the archdeacon ones.
Oh my
God. And that's why in the Greek tradition, yeah, because everybody wants the fancy ones. It became normal in the Greek tradition to wear the double orarium. And so if you're Antiochian, Melkite, Greek Orthodox, presumably Greek Catholic, like Hellenic Catholic, or any of the ones that follow the Mediterranean Orthodox traditions. And actually, Ruthenians seem to have adopted this too. I guess to be in line with Constantinople or something like that. You'll wear the double orarium by default. If you follow the Russian or Ukrainian tradition, theoretically, like the Ukrainian tradition, in as much as it follows the Russian tradition, it's going to be the single orarium when you first get ordained, and if you become an archdeacon, then you get the double orarium.
Does the orarium have any relevance for confession the way it does in the West?
No.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Not for
That's a good question.
Yeah. So the prayer of the orarium in the Russian tradition, there is no prayer. He just puts it on after he gets a blessing from the priest. In the Greek tradition, it's holy, holy, holy Lord of Sabaoth, heaven and earth are full of thy glory. And it emphasizes this connection between the earthly ministers and the heavenly. We'll discuss more of that in a second here. And of course, the difference between this, the subdeacons, of course, cross it, in the front. And depending on if they're from the Russian tradition, they'll have the short one, and that's what the red one in the far or left is. Yeah. If you're a Greek subdeacon, like I was, you have a long one, and so it's going to be longer in the front too, right? And then you have like subdeacon orariums, which are made specifically that kind of are fit more in the middle, which is the middle one, right? And then so the difference is the subdeacon wears it crossed, the deacons wear it on the shoulder or looped around and then on the shoulder. And then also the difference is deacons will wear the cuffs, which are also worn by the priests and the bishops. And the prayer for the cuffs is, and the cuffs are called the epimanikia, just like the stole is called the orarium. The epimanikia literally means just on the wrist. That's all it means. Like all the names of the vestments, like epitreleia means on the neck.
Right.
Yeah, so epimanikia is on the wrists. So all the major clergy, deacons, priests, and bishops wear these, and the prayer for the right hand is thy right hand, O Lord, is glorified in strength. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath shattered enemies, and in the multitude of thy glory hast thou ground down the adversaries. The one on the left, thy hands have made and fashioned me. Give me understanding, and I will learn thy commandments.
How is it fastened?
So you see these loops,
Yeah.
and there's like a string that runs in, so it's like a shoe.
What do you tie the string to? Or
To
is it
itself.
like a,
It's like a
continuous loop?
So loops on each side, and then there's a string on one corner of the cuff. So the string will probably be attached like here or something.
Okay.
And then when you close it here, you loop it in, and then the end of the strand, you just loop around your wrist, and then you slip it underneath. So I'm spinning everywhere. And then you loop it the other way, and then you tighten it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's just kind of loosely on there, but it doesn't really come off.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
Yeah, I could have brought one.
These are
Because
questions
when
I'm
you buy
always-
subdeacon
It's an important
investments,
question.
Like, how does it function?
so
Yes.
like
Those
if
are
you're ever a
interesting
subdeacon, you know, when you buy subdeacon investments, you just buy deacon investments and you don't wear the cuffs, right? Because there's no point in buying like separate subdeacon investments and then
Right.
later you're already a deacon. So I have a bunch of cuffs that I don't wear, you know.
Sure. You should have brought them for demonstration
Right.
purposes.
Yeah. So
Amazing.
of course, the Stikarion is connected to, so all our vestments are connected to the Western vestments too. And so,
what a priest or a deacon or a subdeacon wears before they vest.
cassock,
Okay.
like
yeah.
this, cassock,
Yeah.
and then they put on the Stikarion.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah, but cassock is not a vestment.
Okay.
Like cassock is technically street clothes.
Okay.
Yeah. But that sounds weird because, you know, like
'Cause
it
it's
seems
not
like a
anymore.
fancy robe or something, or like a ritual robe. But technically speaking, this is workwear. You know, a vestment is specifically for liturgical actions.
Okay.
Whereas this, when we're in choir, this is what I would wear, you know. Or like theoretically, if we lived in some Orthodox country where like they recognize like minor orders, like, you know, I would be wearing this everywhere, you know. Like when I was in seminary and they went to Greece, we were told we had to wear cassocks everywhere, you know, stuff like that. But of course, all of our vestments most of them have some correspondence with Western vestments, most if not all. And of course, our Stikarion, especially in the form that is used by the deacon, is connected to the dalmatic of the deacon, right? And if you look at medieval dalmatics and Baroque dalmatics, they look identical.
Is that what this is?
Dalmatic, Stikarion.
Okay.
Dalmatic, Stikarion, right? It's so yeah. Which is also, and the dalmatic, of course, is the vestment of the Western deacon. And it's the same garment historically, and in form, it pretty much is the same thing. And also the tunicle, which was the vestment of the subdeacon, but it was different from the dalmatic in name only. Tunicles and dalmatics are the same. The only difference is tunicles sometimes are less ornate, but it's the same thing. It's a form of the Stikarion, of the Western form. Another example of a dalmatic, they're all this T-shaped garment that derives from the ancient Roman tunic. I'll say something more about that later. But of course, the difference is in the Roman Rite, the stole is worn underneath the dalmatic rather than over it. So they wore an alb, which is actually a different form of the Stikarion, and then they wore the orarion, or the stole, and then they wore the dalmatic. Whereas ours, they wear the Stikarion and then the orarion. But there's an ambiguity there between the alb. Is it the alb or the dalmatic? And we'll talk about that in a second. Except in the Ambrosian Rite. So in the Ambrosian Rite, they vest like our deacons. They'll put the stole on over the dalmatic. And this points to an ancient Oriental influence on the Ambrosian Rite. And of course, here's a depiction, an Ambrosian depiction of the deacon, maybe St. Stephen or something like that, where he has his orarion or his stole over his dalmatic or Stikarion.
I didn't know the Ambrosian Rite was still practiced.
Only in the city of Milan.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they also went through liturgical reform, so it's something like Novus Ordo Ambrosian, right? But yeah,
Well, I mean, there's also the liturgical form of 1572, so.
I'm saying today.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that you don't have Psalm right anymore, so I was just surprised.
So looking at it, these are historical Stikaria, you know, and when we look at them, you know, it really kind of makes us feel like we're in the land of Babylon, away from the Holy Land, because like when you look at modern cheap ones, both Western and Eastern, they look kind of cheap and dinky, you know, compared to the fullness and the richness of ancient ones, right? The ancient ones were just filled with this awareness of the eschatological glory and the revelatory character of vestments.
Patterns are amazing. I love that crown in the middle
Right.
Well, but also I'm looking at, so this right here.
Yeah.
I mean, the print doesn't continue. That would be like, if you ordered something on Amazon like that, you'd be like,
Yeah.
you'd leave a bad review. But this is how you did it, because the fabric was so expensive, you had to be clever. I love that.
And we'll see a lot more examples of ancient vestments. You look at these ancient vestments of Byzantium and Rus and Russia. They were rich, bold, colorful, and like not expected. The types of brocades is not what we would expect today. Like we would expect something like this, right? Like some kind of relatively plain thing with tiny little crosses that you can't even see from a distance, right? You cannot make out the actual brocade patterns, whereas the ancient ones were like bold, rich, lots of contrast, and huge. The patterns were much of a bigger scale, and it was the same brocades that were used for like royal garments, and it's like they kind of look like rugs too, like Oriental rugs. And it was, and they did use these imported fabrics from like the Ottoman Empire and things like that. They were willing to use, just like Father Elias, like these silks and these brocades from distant lands, as long as they were beautiful, right? It's like the three wise men from the Orient coming, bringing their beauty to contribute to the king, right?
And is that really the only criterion for what made a suitable
beauty?
That's it. It's just
because obviously they're not following liturgical colors.
Right.
These are just white. These are bright vestments.
Yeah.
These are bright vestments, right? They reveal the kingdom, at least theoretically, right? Some people might not like them subjectively, but those are people that are not properly formed in our liturgical tradition, and probably boomers. They like this kind of stuff.
Well, and it's easy to mass produce, so it's more accessible to the average person. I mean, our poor little mission here, like.
Yeah, indeed.
Right.
Happy to get.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So. And when you look at how deacons are depicted in iconography, they're usually vested in a kind of archaic form of the vestments, right? And they are more like almost like white linen garments, looking more similar to the alb or the priesticarian of today. And notice there's an ambiguity of where the cuff is placed, right? In the modern way, the cuff is placed directly on the cassock for the deacon, and then he wears the sticharion over that. But when you look at these, the cuff is placed over the white light sticharion, which is actually how the priest vests underneath his phalonium. All
right.
At this point, well, I need to get through. I'm sorry. I need to get through. But then in the far one, that's more typical of how it would look. But then they also have this cloth over their sticharion, and they're holding like a little tabernacle-looking thing. And actually, there are times, especially in monasteries, where they do this. They'll put a cloth over the sticharion and hold a little church-looking thing. It's called a zion, and it probably is related to an ancient kind of coffer. Like if you think of the deacons originally had the ministry of collecting alms for the poor and alms for the church as well. And so, think about how the deacon goes out into the midst of the people to sense. In the ancient church, they probably went out, and that was the collection. So as he went into the midst of the people, the people would toss their coins into this zion or kind of tabernacle looking thing, and then they would bring it back into the altar, right? This is conjecture of scholars and my own conjecture. We don't really know what they are because they don't hold anything. But like the modern forms are just empty. So it's kind of funny, right? And in monasteries, even lay brothers will do it, and lay sisters, like nuns that are not ordained, obviously. They'll even sense with a little hand censer and hold the zion. That's interesting. That's just for our interest. And if you look at ancient depictions of angels, they're depicted as deacons too, right? Because there's this correspondence. Yep. Holy, holy, holy. The deacon prays this because he becomes like the angels. And actually the ancient commentaries say that the way that the stole sits on the shoulder is evocative of angels' wings. So they're depicted as deacons. It is kind of funny, right? Because they're holding fans, and the fans are symbolic of the angels. So it's like angels holding their own symbols, which is which reflects layers of interpretation that have gone on, right? There's an earlier layer of interpretation and then a later of interpretation, right? Because it wouldn't make any sense for an angel to hold his own. So that's like if I held a little fan with my face on it, right? Right? It'd be weird, right?
It's me.
But they serve the heavenly throne just like the earthly ministers serve, well, also the heavenly throne, but the one that we have here. And notice that they're wearing the more archaic form of the sticharion, which is a light alb, and sometimes their cuffs are on the outside, but sometimes they're on the inside. There's that ambiguity there. And as I said, the sticharion the more archaic form of the Sicarian that I keep pointing to, that I keep mentioning, is this ancient Greco-Roman garment of the tunic or chiton, which was a T-shaped garment worn by all classes of people. Fancy people wore a fancier one, poor people wore a less fancy one. It was basically the button-up shirt of the day, right? And the fancier versions had these vertical bands on the side called clavi. One is a clavus and multiple clavi. And it's even depicted on icons of Christ and the saints and the apostles and stuff. They usually have on a chiton or a tunic with a clavus visible on one side, like
that's
and then they have a toga on over that, right? And so underneath he's wearing the forerunner of the Sicarian, right? So another example of the band showing beneath the toga of the ancient Sicarian or ancient tunic. And as I tried to sort of explain, the Sicarian, this ancient tunic actually developed into at least two distinct vestments. But they're kind of the same vestment. Like in our tradition, they have the same word. They're both the Sicarian. The priest Sicarian, which is like, so in the West, it became the alb and the dalmatic. For us, it became the Sicarian, which has an alb form and a dalmatic form, we can say. The priest wears the alb form, and that was probably what the deacon wore originally, until it got fancier and it became stiffer brocade, like the ones that we saw, the beautiful ones that we saw, right? And then the cuff couldn't really fit on it anymore, so they had to put it on the inner garment of the cassock, right? It also became, the alb retained the sort of lighter form, right, of these dudes, maybe made out of linen or something like that. And so we have a more traditional alb on the left, an ancient alb in the middle, and then a modern alb on the right here. We've seen these before, right? And then the priest's Sicarian, as I mentioned, it's called the Sicarian, but it's more like an alb, right? But it's the same T shape, which makes it the same garment. Now the one on the far left there, it retains like the clavi bands to make it, to remind us of the ancient connection. In the Byzantine Rite, so for it's worn under the priestly chasuble in the west, and also the deacon's dalmatic in the west. Well, for us, it's worn under the Phelonian and under the bishop's garments. We see that the vestments of the East and West ultimately share the same origin and history. They're basically comparable to each other. So I like to think of it not as two traditions, but as two instantiations of the same ancient apostolic tradition of Catholic Christianity, right? Which relies on this Roman heritage, right? Even when I was Orthodox, we talked about this idea of Romanity. Like we are Roman. Like Byzantine is a misnomer. We are Romans, Eastern Romans. Right. And the Catholics are Western Romans. So there is a kind of family Romanness that people haven't really talked about in scholarship. It's worth talking about. There's a shared Romanity between East and West, right? That's very different than, say, like the Chaldean Catholics or the Coptic Orthodox that kind of have a provincial tradition, right? It's less about this sort of grand cathedral style of worship, whereas the Roman Rite and the Byzantine Rite do have this kind of grandness to them. So as we said, it is the base garment that represents the new life of Christ, the Sicarian is, and the eschatological wedding garment, the righteous robe of the saints. And it must be interpreted through this Christological key. And so we read in St. Germanus of Constantinople, writing in the 8th century, his commentary on the liturgy, he says, the priestly vestment is the robe of Aaron, which served to cover him down to his feet. It was fiery in appearance. And since Christ wore a crimson cloak at his passion, it indicates that the high priests are servants of such a high priest. The fact that the priests walk about in unbelted Phellonia points out that even Christ thus went to the crucifixion carrying his cross. The presbyters resemble the seraphic powers, covered as if by wings with vestments. We've already seen how the deacons are compared to the angelic powers. Priests too, in their vestments, are said to resemble the seraphim. Remember that man was originally created with angelic glory, and after the fall, the angel blocked the way. Now in the church, man enters paradise again and becomes angelic. To understand how vestments covered the clergy completely and and made them appear angelic, as St. Germanus said, how they appeared fiery, we must understand what beautiful priestly vestments look like. Both beautiful modern examples and ancient relics. And so we go to the first specifically priestly garment that's notable. I mean, when we think of priest, we think of the stole and we think of the phalonion. The most distinctly priestly vestments, besides the stole, is this outer cloak-like garment called the phalonion. And it's the same garment, of course, as the Western chasuble. And it functions basically as the same, but also functions as the cope too. So it's kind of, if the chasuble and cope had a baby, it's the phalonion. Right? So anytime a priest in the West would wear a chasuble or a cope, our priests wore a phalonion. So at processions, he wears a phalonion. At various points in Vespers and Matins, he wears a phalonion, where a Western priest would wear a cope. But also at the Eucharist, he wears a phalonion, which is the chasuble, right? And the priest says, and of course the cope actually has the same origin as the chasuble. And so it all points back to the same cloak-like garment, which we'll talk about in a second. Thy priests, this is the prayer, thy priests, O Lord, shall be clothed with righteousness, and thy saints with rejoicing shall rejoice, always, now, and ever, unto ages of ages. Amen. The original form of the phalonion, and this word phalonion comes from the Latin paenula, was originally a poncho-like garment. It was a common garment in late antiquity, kind of like a sport coat. So if the stacarian is like a button shirt, the paenula was the sport coat, used by both commoners, usually in coarser materials, and also by the upper classes in fancier materials, as we said. Actually, it's in the Bible. In 2 Timothy 4:13, St. Paul asked St. Timothy, remember to bring my philonine he left in Troas. His phalonion that he left in Troas. Translated as cloak. But it's the word paenula, it's the word phalonion. And we said it was a conical garment that covered the priest from his head and neck down to his toes, or at least past his knees. It was this ample garment that completely hid him in his vestments. In the West, the paenula, they preferred the term casula, which became chasuble, which means a little house, because it's this ample garment that hides his body. This is one of the earliest examples of either a chasuble or a phalonion.
Wow.
The chasuble of Pope Clement II. So like I said,
is that the Unum Sanctum Pope?
I don't remember. Yeah. So the long front required the priest to draw the sides of the phalonion up on his arms, the chasuble or phalonion up on his arms, which created an effect described by Saint Simeon of Thessalonica in the 15th century as resembling angelic wings, like the length of the bunched up fabric falling to the sides. Yes?
And then here at St. Peter and Paul, at certain points, the two deacons come and draw.
Yeah, in the Western liturgy, in the traditional Latin liturgy, but also in the Anglican use, there's a part where, so it's a feature that's this effect of the bunching up of the cloth. It's an effect that's mostly lost in modern Orthodox vestments, but as we'll see, not all of them. And once again, this form was essentially the same in both East and West, right? So you have a Western example, Pope Clement, and an Eastern example, Saint Basil, right? See how it covers the arms. So we have the saint being ordained or something like that, and his whole body is covered in the phalonion or chasuble, right? And in this case, a phalonion. This is an Eastern icon, of course. There's evidence for early use by the priest. Saint Ambrose. This is a mosaic of Saint Ambrose, very early, late 4th century. He's in a paenula with a kind of dalmatic or sicarian underneath. And Pope Sylvester in the early 4th century describes it as both streetwear and liturgical wear for bishops and priests. By the 6th century, in the Council of Toledo, it's universal. So it's universal by the 6th century, and then in the 7th century Council of Toledo, it mentions them, indicating that its usage was already widespread. By the 11th century, important bishops in particular began to wear a style of the phalonion in the East called the palistavrium, which means many crosses. So obviously it's the style of phalonion covered in crosses. We see it depicted in icons of bishop saints. And then of course there's modern examples here. That's Blessed Slippy, Cardinal Slippy, Joseph Slippy in the middle. Very important modern Greek Catholic figure, Ukrainian Catholic figure. And then a modern example of a bishop wearing a phalonion today. Although this is kind of a revival style, because of course bishops wear a different garment, which we'll describe later in a second here, more commonly. And once again, the shape was conical originally in both east and west. This is actually another Western example of a conical chasuble, but it had the exact same shape as the eastern one, right? So once again, same garment, just like the Stacarian and Dalmatic were the same, the Phelonian and chasuble were the same. So in the Western example, orphreys, these bands of fabric reinforced the seam in the front and the neck opening, and that became a standard look in medieval Catholic vestments, Western Catholic vestments. Whereas in the East, it was only the neck opening that was reinforced with additional fabric. And so it had this effect of like a yoke, and sometimes they would become very fancy and jeweled yokes. And you see that even in iconography, right? Previously, here, the yoke of the Phelonian is kind of more fancy and jeweled and embroidered. And we'll see actual examples here in a second. So this is a Western chasuble, a very fancy one, actually using a Byzantine brocade, actually. But once again, same garment, right? This is a Greek Phelonian, so same shape. Now, Phelonian don't look like this today, obviously. So we'll talk about that soon. It's a Greek Phelonian from the Ottoman period. So actually not that ancient. Here are some historical examples. The 17th century one, we have the fancy jeweled yoke, and once again, these rich brocades that we wouldn't ever see today.
It definitely looks like a rug.
But a beautiful one, beautiful one, right? And of course, this doesn't fit into any liturgical color, you know? Here's some more.
This is also interesting, like, the addition of that yoke there means that the garment's probably constructed a lot more differently. You can see like these sort of panels that emerge rather than like a rectangle wrapping around. This is fascinating. How much the construction has changed through these history things.
Yes.
Those of us who know how to sew are sewing it
like,
out in our heads.
yeah.
Like, wait, these are different.
How would you cut this?
Right,
A piece of paper, I want to show you something.
There's paper in this building somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, so. Okay, we need to do a evaluation right now. It's 7:48.
I gotta get home.
Okay.
Probably.
I gotta sit her till 9.
So
Nice.
let me just finish up the Phelonian bit first, and then that'll be a good time to stop then. And we're like a quarter through. I did not think this through the way.
You know,
I thought I would like rapidly.
This is great.
This is amazing. We can do more than 4 classes.
Yeah.
We also have a spare Thursday at the end of the.
And I also can next time just be like, hey, just don't count on me coming home.
Yeah.
I didn't prep everybody for
No, you're totally good. No, I thought I'd be somehow getting through this at least in an hour. I don't know why I thought that, but
this is what it's like when I do.
you're talking to a bunch of nerds who want you to keep going in more detail.
So the voluminous nature of the Phelonian gave birth to an alternate way to have the free arm movement. Instead of hiking it up on the sides that we already saw, there was a system of buttons and loops that was developed such that you could button the bottom of the Phelonian up to the top. That's what's going on here. And this is actually still done in the Russian Old Rite tradition and also in certain Athonite Greek monastic traditions. They have really long Phelonian that they hike up with the buttons and loops.
Is the benefit of that it retains the symbolism of like it could be a fully covering
I was gonna
garment?
say, why
Yes.
wouldn't you just cut it short at that point?
Yes,
But-
well, eventually they do, as we all know.
Right.
But why wouldn't you? Because the ancient Typica, the ancient rubrics actually have things in it that say, at this point, the priest gives a blessing from inside his Phelonian.
Got it. Okay, so he has
So,
to be
so the
able to
most,
access
so the
inside.
most ancient liturgical books
So
make a
cool.
distinction between
An inside blessing
inside,
and an outside blessing.
which is weird. Like, why would you give a blessing from inside?
No,
your
that's not
Phelonian,
weird
right?
at all. That's awesome.
Well, for most people, they would think it's
Sure.
weird, right? It's interesting for us, but it makes sense in the Byzantine way of concealing.
Yeah.
There's like so many layers, right?
100%.
Inside is
that makes so much
Phelonian,
sense.
from inside the altar, from behind the iconostas. There's people in the narthex, there's people outside. You know, it's so many layers of veiling and concealing.
Absolutely.
And also, there's a thing where, so you know how at Matins there's the veneration of the gospel for Sunday? We have barely seen, we've never seen it here, but if you've been to a Byzantine Catholic church or Orthodox church at Men's,
Yes.
at Matins at Orthodox, there's the veneration of the gospel at typical resurrectional Orthodox, like on the Sunday, excepting, Palm Sunday, and then I think there's one other one where it's not resurrectional. But in the Russian tradition, the gospel is laid on analogian, and everybody comes venerates. In the Greek tradition, the priest holds it, and everybody venerates like that. And of course, uber pious Orthodox will then kiss the priest's hand, but actually, this is one case where that's not proper, because in the ancient tradition, he would have been holding the gospel, and his hands would have been within his phalonion, and so his phalonion would have acted like a humeral veil.
Right.
Like so he would be holding it with the grip of his, so his phalonian would be coming out.
Emphasizing it's not the man,
to
it's just the gospel.
The Eucharist is carried in
Right.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't kiss the priest's hand. You wouldn't be able to, you know.
Right.
So there's stuff like that that's very interesting when you consider the ancient form of the phalonion, right? So yeah, as I said, the old believers preserved this practice in certain Greek monastic traditions. So I said everything about that, and then so as we said, both the chasuble and the phalonion went through radical transformations during the Baroque period, basically. First gradually, and then more radical changes were made. More and more of the voluminous material was cut away for the Western chasuble from the sides, and it eventually gave us the fiddleback, which is kind of considered traditional today, but you know, it's the last form of the chasuble that we have today. Similarly, in the Orthodox world, there was a shift in aesthetics, and more of the material began to be cut away as well, but this time from the front, rather than from the sides, making the system of buttons and loops no longer necessary. Although sometimes they were still retained, like here. But basically, it was no longer necessary.
Vestigial.
This resulted in the classic Baroque, what I call the Baroque cut of the phalonion, which is usually called the Russian style. But this is actually a misnomer because it wasn't just used in Russia, it was used throughout but you look at old photographs from Greece, and all the priests are wearing the high back style. So it's not Russian, it's Baroque. And so if you're in Russia, of course, if you're in the Greek world, they used it too. If you want to say high back, that's fine too, but that's a little ambiguous because even the ancient garments had that shape from the conical form, right? Some people wonder, is the Greek form original? And some people would think, yeah, the Greek form's original because it's the Greek one, and it came from Greece, the Greek world, and they seem to be more primitive, blah, blah, blah. Yes and no. It wasn't stiffened like it is today. Well, actually, in those really jeweled ones, it would have been, right? So it would have created this sloped shape. It's the natural result of, if you have a length of fabric, and what do? You fold it over, you fold the edges over, and you sew it in the front, right? And it creates this sloped shape on the sides. You stick the head out, and it looks like that, right? And so what do? You can either stiffen it with interfacing, or you can cut it, you can tailor it to the shoulder.
Yeah.
But anyways, so this is how we got the shape. It comes from that, right? And it was the normal style really until the 20th century, at least in the Orthodox world. So this is a variant of the conical style, but you see how it still has this sloped shoulder that is the quote-unquote high back. This is from a museum that I went to on the island of Crete in Greece. So I saw this one, pretty interesting. It's kind of pointed in the front, which is different a little bit. That reflects how, rather than sewing the front straight, you kind of angle it like that, right? And so here's an example of a priest wearing such a style of one. But you notice how it's still sloped on the shoulders, giving it the high back effect, right? So for various reasons, I'm not sure what the reason is, modern Greek Catholics have seemed to have adopted the Greek style. So yeah, I mean, you see it even in Western vestments, right? You see like in I guess these are deacons here, this is a special kind of mass where the deacons vest in a kind of chasuble. I don't know the full history of this. It's a Latin thing I'm not going to talk about, but I just wanted to show the sloped shoulder effect from the original conical shape, right? So it's not a weird Russian thing. It's just what they look like, you know. Yeah, Greek Catholics have tended to prefer the cutaway form, like the so-called Greek style. I think just to distinguish ourselves from the Russians, because Russia is this big bully in that part of the world, and we want to be different than the Russian Orthodox, you know, especially if you're Ukrainian. You want to have a distinct identity, you know. I personally do like the high back. I think they look cooler. Yeah, so I said a lot about the history so far, and I'll end with these thoughts for today. If people want to stay a little bit later, maybe we can talk a little bit more. But Byzantine and medieval writers weren't actually concerned with any of these historical facts. The historical origin of vestments, their origin in Roman clothing. They were more interested in their mystical symbolism. And also Western writers had the same fascination, the mystical symbolism, not the historical origin. As we've seen, virtually all of our vestments derived from ordinary Roman dress of late antiquity. It was the Sunday best of the late antique world. But as we have seen, they took on a symbolic character rapidly, as we see in the vesting prayers, so that they were not merely viewed as reflections of the earthly world of that time, but of heaven itself. Vestments were interpreted to be in continuity, not with ancient Roman fashions, but with the Old Testament vision of priestly worship. Roman garments, and not the actual secular history of Roman garments that they actually derived from. This latter fact was simply not important to them, that they were secular Roman garments. And they may have even denied such a thing. They may have said, no, it doesn't come from these Roman garments. They come from the robe of Aaron. They may have made those arguments. And actually, you hear that even today. People will say, like, oh, the fringes of the epitrachilion come from the talit of the Jew. No, that's not where it comes from. But if you want to make a spiritual argument and say it has the same spiritual significance, like we reach out and touch the garment, then that's what the fathers would have said. And they may have even made erroneous historical claims to get that fact across, right? They just had a different mindset than us today, right?
Well, and Jesus is the emperor of Rome now, so.
True, yeah.
Right.
And so the conical high back style, and we see how it engulfs the priest in its voluminous nature. His own individuality is hidden, allowing the priest, as we said earlier, to reveal Christ as an image of man made divine, of the new man recreated in Christ. The Latin phrase is apt, in persona Christi. The priest engulfing himself in his office and in the beautiful garments of his office allows Christ to be revealed more fully as the true celebrant of the liturgy. Entering into the altar, behind the veil as a mere man, the priest emerges as an image of the new Adam, crowned with glory, as the vesting prayers say. Vestments made it not about the individual, but about Christ, as the individual becomes more and more hidden deeply in the layers of garments. The priest manifests in material means the words of St. Paul, for you have died and your life is hid with Christ in God. And I guess we'll stop after we just look at the more examples. So let's look at some beautiful examples of modern vestments that do capture the ancient aesthetics of priestly splendor. Right? These are modern vestments that you can buy today. Once again, the cream of the crop, right? It's beautiful red vestments with the so-called Greek form and so-called Russian form, right?
What's the square?
What's square? Oh, well, I guess we'll have to wait until next week to talk
about
it.
I figured that was the case. I wasn't trying
It's the epigonatian, but yeah.
We'll get there.
So
we're not going anywhere.
I love blue vestments. Blue vestments are, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm also,
anything to honor.
I also have a strong Marian devotion. So.
Yeah.
But green vestments are great too, actually. I love those emerald tones. And probably, to be fair, you probably wouldn't have seen such jewel tones in ancient vestments. Green vestments probably would have been more like a muted sage green. So in the few icons that we have that depict green vestments, it is more of a muted forest or sage, which is also very beautiful. Some Lenten vestments,
Nice.
Yeah.
When we talked about the green after the Pentecost liturgy, I got curious and I looked it up. So the reason green became the color of ordinary time in the Novus Ordo was because most of what you would think of as ordinary time is after Pentecost. There's a little bit after Epiphany, but the bulk of the calendar is after Pentecost, so that just became the year-round color for it. Yeah.
So we'll talk about this next time, but you see how there's different styles of the stole, the epitrachilion. So there's like a solid form, like in the black one, it's like one solid rectangle. That was a later development. but I think they look cool to me. It reminds me of like some sort of like fancy apron. Not that that's.
It looks like this. It looks like a scapular.
Scapular,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
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 Is it like a corollary, or does it just happen to look like
It just happens to look like
Okay.
it. Yeah. And some beautiful, what I would describe as gold vestments. But of course, it's like red and gold and burgundy and all kinds of colors. And I think these would be apt for Pascha. And then just some more. I put these together because they're both kind of blue again, but obviously a lot of things are going on with these ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then those are actually quite splendid. All that embroidery, it is embroidery, but all those little pieces are pearls.
No way.
Whoa.
And I know that at the time, maybe like about 10 years ago, those vestments cost something like $13,000.
Obviously.
And the liturgics professor at my seminary had a set of those vestments that were gifted to him. He would never buy them. He received it as a gift he was a canon lawyer too, and he did some canon law work for the archdiocese of the Serbian church in Australia. There was like a legal battle going on, and so he was called to serve as a witness and an expert in canon law for them. And so as a gift, the Serbian metropolis or archdiocese or something, they gifted him these $13,000 vestments with real pearls. He said he wants to be buried in them. I think he's only worn them. He wears them on Pascha only.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, you look at modern vestments, both East and West, and they're just kind of not as great. After you see it's like, I just want us to form a good eye to see what is beautiful.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. Although I'm being a bit paradoxical here, right? Because my message was also, in spite of whatever condition we find ourselves in, even if we're in a warehouse, even if we don't have the nice vestments, we can still illuminate our experience by having the new eyes that even this, in the right spirit, we can still appreciate it, even though ideally this is not.
It's still important to have an eye for
I love those. Like, they're very different from the other ones, and they hit a very different note for me.
Yeah.
But I would still,
Yeah, I mean, granted, looking at these, I would say that the Roman vestments look worse than the Orthodox one. But I wasn't raised Roman Catholic, so I don't have any fondness for.
I have a visceral reaction to the ones on the right.
Yeah.
In a negative way, because all of the priests who wore those were crazy.
That's really funny.
In my particular life.
Yeah, well, it's just because I'm just like, I think my priest growing up or something, and that's why I have I received first communion from someone.
I received incredibly questionable confessions from priests in those vestments.
So there's interesting efforts in modern, but this will be the last.
These are great. There's like distinct cultural nods to different cultures.
I love the white and black contrast.
So these are interesting because these are efforts to revive the full form of the Phalonian that goes all the way down to the knees, right? So look how long, like the one in the middle just looks like a chasuble, right?
Yeah.
Like a Western chasuble. So they're not quite. They don't actually look like what ancient conical Phallonia look like. They like the one in the middle is more similar to like a Gothic chasuble, but they're trying to capture the spirit of the voluminous nature, right? And here's some more examples today. So the one on the far right even has the buttons, the system of buttons and loops again. So it's interesting, and it has that effect of the angel's wings, as Saint I think Saint Simeon said.
I like the high back, but it puts my mind in weird places. It makes me think of like Space Marines from Warhammer 40K or something like armor.
I'm pretty sure the Bene Gesserit and Dune were like modeled off of Byzantine high back vestments.
Yeah. Oh, that explains a lot. Yeah.
So I mean,
so that's Chrysostom?
That's Saint Basil and that's Saint
Arnold.
Saint Arnold, yeah. I actually, someone from my old Orthodox parish, their dad actually made that icon.
Oh,
wow.
And they gave it to the brewery, and so now it's like
to the brewery?
Okay.
Saint Arnold's,
Yeah, that's great.
Well, and look at the photo one. It has. I mean, is this?
That's a chasuble, it's like a Benedictine monk.
Okay, I was like, that's a Western.
Yeah.
That's a Western.
But it has but it's the same. If you look at the icon of Saint Basil, it's the same.
Yeah.
Or
Same
even
shape.
these dudes, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what the vestments used at North Show look like?
I've seen. I think they look nice. Yeah, they're kind of like more austere, like medieval looking ones.
Yeah. I was just curious because I know they are a little more Eastern in their aesthetics and stuff. So
yeah, not to me, it's not about being like, I think it's not about being Eastern, it's about being like ancient. Like the more far back in time you go, the more things look similar.
Yes.
Right. So if you just look at Western vestments and you go back to like the 6th century, you're like, oh, why does that look Byzantine?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's because there was a common world that was shared. It's interesting. You all know that story about St. Thomas Aquinas and how he had the vision of Christ when he was contemplating the crucifix? Or maybe you don't know that story.
With the straw, and at the end he's like,
After he
everything
stopped
I've
writing
done.
the
So
is
that's the
with
vision he had, and then that was his reaction.
Yeah.
Right. But the story is like either after Mass or during Mass, he was meditating on the crucifix, and then Christ spoke to him from the crucifix. Right. And I had in my mind like, oh yeah, he was praying in front of like the Western crucifix. But then I actually saw an image of what that crucifix looked like, and it looks like it's a Byzantine icon of the crucifixion.
Oh.
That's what he was praying in front of, right? And so our perception of the ancient Western medieval world is completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I can find. Yeah. So. Yeah.
I've told Sam this story, but I don't know if I've told you too. But he was the economo at the time, but he was a brother from North Shore visiting Central Texas because he has family here, and he was also doing like fundraising for the priory. And
so this is what St. Thomas Aquinas prayed in front of every day.
Hello, that's an icon.
Yeah. So this is my whole thing about, we don't have two traditions. We have one tradition with two instantiations.
yeah,
But
he came over to my house briefly, and
so
he
this is
was
what
there
St.
and
Thomas
distracted my son
So
with his
you go
prayer
back
book.
far
It was
enough,
like a little
it's all the same.
choke key,
That's
right? And he explained that they were trying to like adhere to kind of a primitive, relatively primitive form of like Benedictine spiritual practice and everything. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I was hoping to finish this, but I guess we can't. But if there's any questions or comments, I guess now's the time.
Well,
If anyone needs to leave, they can leave.
one of the slides you just showed where you said modern people were turning them. I think it's the next slide.
Well, these are modern ones
Yeah,
that are
that
like
one.
recreating sort
That
of the ancient look.
Yes, this one.
Yeah.
Well, so this is really interesting because this is, it's more ancient, but obviously, this fabric is very plain. This is like, this is.
Yeah, and some of the ancient examples I showed were a little bit more plain.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because we're contrasting sort of the austerity of the more modern things with like the full embroidered brocades and everything, and so this is they've returned to it in terms of the longer shape, but probably for just expense reasons, which are very real worldly concerns. It's not fully decked out in the.
Although it does give like a medieval vibe, like when you see it, like at least when I see it, it's like, oh, I see what they're doing. They're trying to well, okay, because those super fancy vestments, right? Probably. So today we have that concept of liturgical colors, but probably what was done in the ancient Byzantine and Roman world were, instead of having liturgical colors, you just had all the feast days, right? And so on the feast days, whether it's Pascha, whether it's Epiphany, whether it's Annunciation, you just wear those really fancy ones that I just showed y'all, right? With all the rich ones.
Yeah.
So those are for those days.
Yeah.
And then every other, like during your typical Sunday or typical daily services, they probably wore something like this.
Okay.
That's probably what it was,
To create more gradations, a distinction between.
But there's still beauty, right?
Yeah,
There's a noble beauty to how simple it is, and of course, like the whole thing about the yolks that I mentioned, how those were the
from Vatican II.
and like the Byzantine tradition also has glimpses of glory, right? Just the slight revelation of the stole, and it's like a richer. It's the fancy brocade that's on the yoke, but it's just you barely see it, and then when he moves his hand, it kind of disappears. It's just on the. It's like waiting to be revealed, kind of thing.
Yeah, when he
just behind
raises
the
his
veil.
arms.
Right,
Yep,
right,
yep.
yeah.
I looked up what the TLM deacons are doing, wearing the chasubles. So they call it a folded chasuble, but to us it's like a high back.
Folded chasubles.
It's for the penitential liturgies.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
Advent,
It's all
Lent,
coming back.
Ember Days, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's why they were purple.
Honestly, I used to go to TLM, never saw them do it, so I just
Interesting.
had no
Gotcha.
idea. Yeah.
But okay, so I guess we'll have to finish
It's great.
Yeah,
I mean, you
this
guys
was
can keep
great
going,
stuff. Thank
but
you.
I did not prep.
No, I mean, we should get going too. Like,
No, I gotta
mean,
feed
you know,
the
so, yeah.
I gotta feed the boy. He's been very patient. You've been a very good boy.
Yeah,
I
thank
really
you. Were
appreciate
grateful.
Yeah, this
Thanks for coming.